Hey guys, it's Jeff again with Apex CDL Institute. It's been a while since we've done a training video on our YouTube channel. The last one we did was our pre-trip exam that we did back in, I believe it was like 2014. So it was quite a while. At the time we did it, I had no idea that video was going to become so popular. Right now we're nearing 8 million views on it. And I've always wanted to redo it because I didn't really like the quality of the video. I mean, at the time we were a small school, we had just opened up. We shot it on a $500 camcorder with an internal mic and everything. The audio quality, the video quality was horrible, but the video worked. It got the information across to the students that needed it, and we expected it was only going to be our students watching it. We didn't realize that people from all around the country would be using it, so I figured I'd never change it. Well, we're going to be changing it now because AMVA and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has decided to change the CDL testing model. So if you're watching this video, you probably already realized that there's 3 parts to the CDL testing model. There's your pre-trip inspection, which is what we're going to be doing today. There's your backing and range skills, which we're going to be doing a video on that as well. And then there's your road test. The pre-trip and the backing skills are what's changing. The road test is staying the same. So on the pre-trip, what they've done is they haven't really changed what you're inspecting as much, because the reality is trucks haven't changed that much. The technology is pretty much the same. Everything's pretty much the same. They've just changed what parts you need to check. They're eliminating some things. They're reducing it down to the basic safety items that you need to check. Now, the one thing I want to stress here, this is only going to be good for states that have adopted the new CDL model. If you live in a state that's still using the old CDL model, you're going to need to use our old pre-trip video until your state updates it. Okay, so this is only if your state has adopted the new CDL model. You might want to call your state when you schedule your CDL test and find out which one they're using. Your school that you're training at should know all that, and they should be telling you from there. So I want to take a moment to explain the actual pre-trip exam, how it works, how you're going to be graded, and what are the things that you could possibly fail on. So primarily what you're going to be graded on is an accumulation of points for the items that you've named and that you've properly demonstrated to the examiner what you would be looking for on those items to ensure that you know how to properly inspect them. But there are ways that you can fail the test automatically, so we want to make sure you understand that. So ideally, the idea is that you're supposed to accumulate enough points after you've named enough items that need to be tested and what needs to be checked on those items. And once you've got a sufficient number of points, it's considered passing. But there's a couple ways that you can automatically fail the test as well, and we want to make sure you avoid those things. The first one is not following instructions. So if you, after your examiner gives you instructions and you don't properly follow those instructions, your examiner is going to give you some guidance and say, hey, remember, you're supposed to do it this way. And if you continually do it against the rules, then at that point, the examiner is going to automatically fail you. The other way to automatically fail is to do something unsafe, something that the examiner deems is unsafe, that you shouldn't have done, that could have resulted in somebody getting hurt. Normally, the examiner is going to tell you, hey, don't do it like that again, because if you do, you might get hurt or you might hurt somebody else. They're going to give you an opportunity to correct your behavior. And if you don't, you continue doing that unsafe act, they might automatically fail you. There is one other way that you can automatically fail the test, and we're going to cover that part once we get inside the truck, and that is your brake check. The brake check has to be done exactly the way the state says it has to be done, exactly per the examiner's score sheet. So when you see me doing things on here or talking about things on here, I know you may be at a school where your instructor says, well, that's not how it's done. You have to understand that I'm a state licensed examiner with the state of Kansas. The CDL test is standardized throughout the nation by AMVA and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and I'm doing it right out of the examiner's handbook. Not the student's handbook, not the handbook you use to train from, but the examiner's handbook, the handbook that the examiner themselves uses to grade your scores, to figure out what you're saying and are you saying it correctly, the parts that you're supposed to be inspecting. So if somebody tells you that that's not the way it's supposed to be done, they're not reading the examiner's handbook. So that's the way we do it, and it's the correct way that'll get you through this process. Okay, so we're going to be doing the pre-trip now. I'm going to show you how things are supposed to be done. Just keep in mind as we do this that AMVA did change the pre-trip a little bit. They've removed some things off of the pre-trip that you used to have to do on the old one. So as a school, I'm allowed to teach up to the standard. And as long as I meet that standard, which is on the CDL examiner's list and everything, and the new entry-level driver training rules, I have to do at least that. But we've never done just the basics. We've never done just the minimum standard. We always go above and beyond. There's some things that were removed off of the pre-trip that were on the old ones that I felt that shouldn't have been removed. So we still teach it here, that a student driver becoming a new driver should check those things during their pre-trip. I'm going to point those things out still on this video, but I'll preface it by letting you know that this is not one of the things that's actually on the examiner's checklist. It's not a point that gets removed for naming something that's not on their checklist. But I think because this video is for my school and we teach to a better standard, I want to make sure that those things are covered as well before we get started. So now that I've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and start the pre-trip. Now we start in a little bit different sequence than what's on the actual examiner's checklist. And that's because it doesn't work properly with the way a truck functions. So we do it the way that makes the most sense and makes it easier for our students. In the end, as long as you cover everything on that examiner's checklist, that's all they need. There's no order that has to happen in. So we're going to start now with the outside of the truck, which is actually the beginning steps of our interior check, our in-cab check. And the reason why is the state of Kansas wants the in-cab check done first, because if you remember, I mentioned that there is a brake check that's done during that part, that if you get the brake check done improperly, if you fail that part, you automatically fail the test. So they want us to get the in-cab portion done first, so that way if you fail, we just stop the test at that point. We don't continue going through the whole truck. Because that's one of the things that's different with the new test model, is that on every student now gets an entire truck instead of just a Form A, Form B, or Form C like they used to have. So for our in-cab, it's actually going to start outside the truck because we're going to be inspecting for certain safety items. Some of them are outside the truck. So it's going to begin with our 3 pieces of safety equipment. Our 3 pieces of safety equipment that we check for. First thing is going to be our safety fuses, which we keep in our door panel here. Our fire extinguisher, which you have to make sure is at least 10 BC or better, has to be fully charged, up to date, and properly secured in the cab. Then from there, we're going to go and check for our emergency parking triangles, which we would have right here. So we've got our 3 emergency reflective triangles here. Okay, so now that we're going to enter the truck, one thing I want to explain to you is the proper technique for entering the truck. It's important from a safety standpoint that you enter the truck properly. It's not complicated, but it does require using 3 points of contact at all times. Okay, this is one of those things that if you do it incorrectly, entering or exiting the truck the wrong way, your examiner might tell you, hey, listen, you can't exit the truck that way again. And if you continue doing it, it could automatically fail you for a safety violation. So what they mean by 3 points of contact at all times, it's simple. You got 2 hands, you got 2 feet. And as you enter the truck, at least 3 of them have to be making contact with something that they're supposed to be hanging onto, like a handrail or something like that, your steps, at all times, okay? So they don't want you doing anything where you have only 2 points of contact, because it's too easy to slip and fall. Too many drivers get hurt that way. So we're going to enter the truck using 3 points of contact. Okay, so the first thing now that you're in the cab that you're going to be doing is you're going to be making sure that you put your seatbelt on. So I check my seatbelt. I'm checking the seatbelt for any frays to make sure it's not damaged, that it properly locks into the latch properly, and it's properly secured. At that point, you also have to remember that when your examiner gets in the truck, you're going to ask them to put on their seatbelt as well. Sometimes they won't remind you about it, or sometimes they won't put it on themselves, but you have to make sure that everybody in the truck, since you're in control of it, is wearing their seatbelt. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to start off with a light check. Now at this point, you're going to want to ask the examiner to assist you with a light check to make sure that the lights are working. What they'll do is they'll stand outside the truck, you'll let them know what lights you're activating, and they will look at them for you to make sure that they're working properly. So I'm going to ask Ricky, one of our examiners here, he's my senior instructor, he's going to assist us with this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the turn signals, and I'm going to have Ricky, I'm going to tell him I'm going to check my left turn signal first. The indicator's working as well. My right turn signal. The indicator's working as well. I'm going to check my headlights. Headlights are working. I'm going to check my brights. Brights are working. I'm going to check my hazards. He indicates that my hazards are working. And now we're going to check the brake lights. He's got to check them from the rear as well. I'm going to watch him in the rear view. When he gets to the back, he'll give me a thumbs up to let me know that he's back there. And we'll check the turn signals again, the hazards, and the brake lights again. So my examiner's in place. I'm going to go ahead and check the brake lights. Brake lights are working. Left turn signal, working. Right turn signal, working. And hazards, working. So now your light check is done. So now that we've done our light check, we're going to begin the rest of our in-cab pre-trip. First thing I'm going to do is turn the key on. I'm going to make sure that my ABS light comes on so to know that my ABS is functioning properly. I'm going to do what's called a safe start. I'm going to put my foot on the brake. I'm going to make sure that the vehicle is in neutral, which it is, and I'm going to go ahead and start the truck up. Now the next thing I have to do is I have to make sure that my air compressor's governor cutoff cuts off somewhere between 120 to 140 psi. So remember, you've got two different air gauges. You've got your primary and your secondary. They're going to both need to be at that cutoff point, and you can hear it outside the truck when the governor cuts off. So we're going to go ahead and run the engine speed up a little bit to fill those air tanks up a little bit faster so you can hear what that sounds like. And you're going to tell the examiner, I'm going to run my engine speed up. I'm going to listen for my governor cutout somewhere between 120 to 140 psi. Now while I'm running this engine up and I'm watching my air pressure rise, it's a good thing to mention to the examiner that you're checking both your primary and secondary air gauges to make sure that they are functioning properly and they are properly monitoring your air pressure. And you hear that sound there? That was the sound of the governor cutting out. I can see here based on my gauge readings that it happened right at about 125 to 130 psi. So that means that my governor is functioning properly. Okay, at this point we're going to start checking the other parts of the interior of the cab. First thing I'm going to start with is my mirrors. I'm going to make sure that my mirrors are not cracked, damaged, or loose. They're clean and they're properly adjusted. I can see down the side of my truck properly, and I can see where my tires are at. I'm going to check my windshields. I'm going to make sure that my windshields are not cracked, damaged, or loose. They're clean. I can see out of them properly. They're free of any obstructions like improper stickers or things like that. And at which point then I would check the passenger side mirror, make sure that it's clean, properly adjusted, it's not cracked, damaged, or loose, and it's that I can see down the trailer. When the trailer is straight and I look in both mirrors, I want to be able to see both sides of my trailer, and I want to be able to see where my tires are at. That way I know that the mirrors are properly adjusted. And now would be a good time to mention, this is one of the things that's been changed on the pre-trip. As trucks become more modern and advanced and technology is applied to different trucks, this would be a time where you would want to check any of your alternate monitoring devices, anything like a backing camera or a traffic camera. You want to check that at this point and make sure that it's working as well. On the old pre-trip, they didn't have that. Okay, this is one of those things that I told you, the new pre-trip model doesn't require you to check it, but I think it's just common sense. While I'm here looking at all this, I want to make sure that my water temperature gauge is working and that it's rising properly. I also want to make sure that my oil pressure gauge is functioning properly and it's at the proper operating level. I think it's just common sense to check those things. I'm going to go ahead at this point. I'm going to go ahead and check my windshield wipers and make sure that they work properly. I'm going to make sure that the arms are not cracked, damaged, or loose, and that the windshield blades have no frays, that they're in good condition and they're making proper contact with the windshield so that they clean the windshield properly. You can also check your windshield wipers fluid to make sure that it's spraying properly instead of getting the windshield all wet and dirty. Right now I'm not going to do that, but it would be a good idea to check the windshield wiper fluid as well. Another thing that you're going to need to check is your heater and your defroster. They're not just a luxury item, they're actually important. If you cannot keep the cab properly heated in the wintertime and you can't keep the defroster working properly, you will not be able to see out of your windows. So what you're going to need to do is turn the fan on. You're going to need to turn it to the heater position. So now I got the fan on, it's in the heater position. I'm going to put my hand down and I'm going to make sure that the hot air is blowing, which it is. And now I'm going to move it to the defrost position and I'm going to put my hand up there and I'm going to feel that, yes, it is blowing hot air. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off right now so I don't sweat. But you want to make sure that your heater and your defroster is working as well. And now you're going to take an opportunity to test your horns. Keep in mind, you have two different horns. You have a city horn and you have an air horn. I'm going to check first. I'm going to check my city horn. That works. And then secondly, I'm going to check my air horn. That works as well. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is our brake check. First thing we're going to do is check our parking brakes to make sure that our parking brakes are working. You can't check them both at the same time because you're going to have to tug against them. So you're going to have to release one, check it, then release the other and check it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my, my trailer's parking brake. And I'm going to do that by releasing the tractor's parking brake. I'm going to let it stabilize. Now I'm going to put the vehicle in drive, and I'm going to lightly tug against the trailer's brakes to make sure that they're holding properly. So I can feel that the trailer's parking brakes are holding properly. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the tractor's parking brake, and I'm going to release the trailer's parking brake. Same thing, I'm going to tug against it to make sure that the tractor's parking brake is now holding. Okay, so it's holding properly. Now I'm going to release both brakes, and I'm going to do a 5-mile-an-hour roll. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the truck up to about 5 miles an hour, and I'm going to apply the service brake pretty hard. What I'm looking for when I apply that service brake is to make sure, obviously, that the truck stops the way it's supposed to, but I'm also looking to make sure that the steering wheel doesn't pull from one side to the other, which could indicate suspension damage or your brakes being out of adjustment, one brake stopping harder than the other. So I'm going to let my foot off the brake, and I'm going to get the vehicle up to 5 miles an hour. Give it a little throttle, 5 miles an hour, apply the brake. Okay, the truck stopped good. The wheel didn't pull from one side to the other, which indicates that the brakes are working properly. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and set the parking brake, put the vehicle in neutral, and I'm going to go ahead and exit the vehicle and put the wheel chocks in, because the next part of the brake check requires me to release both parking brakes, and we don't want the truck to roll away. All right, it's important to remember that as you exit the truck, you exit using 3 points of contact at all times, just like you did when you got in the truck. Make sure that you exit facing the truck, not away from the truck. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up my hatch here. I'm going to pull out my wheel chocks. I'm going to set my wheel chocks in place. And I'm going to go ahead and re-enter the truck using 3 points of contact at all times. So now that we're back in the truck, we're going to go ahead and put our seatbelt back on, make sure it's properly latched, and we're going to continue with our air brake check. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and shut the engine off. And the reason you need to shut the engine off is because as the engine's running, so is the compressor. And the compressor is generating air pressure, which is constantly keeping the tanks topped off. So what you're going to be checking for, the first thing you're going to check for, is leaks in the system. If you have the engine still running, that compressor will be covering up or masking any leaks you may have, and that's not going to give you a good indication of whether or not your system is properly holding air. So what we're going to do is, again, make sure the vehicle's in neutral. We're going to go ahead and shut the engine off, but we have to turn the key back on to get the gauges working again, okay? So now with the key back on and the gauge is operational again, we're going to go ahead and begin our brake check. First thing we're going to do is we're going to release the parking brakes. And that's the reason we had to put the wheel chocks in, so the vehicle doesn't roll away. And the reason you have to release the parking brakes is because right now, most of it, if not probably about 80% of your air brake system is not charged. It has no air pressure in it. So you're not checking for leaks if you check it now. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to release the truck's parking brakes. By doing that, I've charged up the brake chambers for the parking brakes on the truck. And now I'm going to release it for the trailer, which means I'm also supplying air to the trailer's tanks as well. So I fill that up now. Now the trailer's getting air pressure. You can hear that takes a little bit longer to equalize because there's a lot more air back there. So I'm not going to begin my 4-part brake check until that stops equalizing. So you listen for the sound. And at this moment, I like to take a little time to listen outside for any obvious air leaks. See if you hear any leaking. All right, now my air pressure system has stabilized. I'm going to go ahead and begin my brake check. First thing I'm going to do, remember we said sail. S is for static. My static, I'm not going to apply the brake. I'm going to look at the gauges. I'm going to watch them. And I'm going to make sure that, because this is a combination vehicle, truck and trailer, that I don't lose more than 3 PSI over a 60-second period. So I'm going to watch the gauges, and either I time it myself, or some states allow you to ask the examiner to time you. Most examiners, like we do, we keep a stopwatch with us, and we'll time you if you don't have an ability to do so. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say, I'm going to watch my gauges. I'm going to make sure that I don't lose more than 3 PSI over a 60-second period. Instructor or examiner, will you time me or time it yourself? When your examiner says move on, or when you've hit 60 seconds, you're going to say, okay, now I'm going to do my A. So it's S-A. A is for applied. I'm going to apply my brake. And I'm going to make sure that because I'm applied, I can't lose more than 4 PSI over a 60-second period. You're going to apply the brake. Watch your gauges. You're going to get a little bit of a pressure drop at the beginning because you just sent air pressure to the brake chambers. Once it's stabilized, you're going to watch. I can't lose more than 4 PSI over a 60-second period. Okay, we're done, and now we're going to move on. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to check our emergency warning buzzer. The emergency warning buzzer, it's one of the things that's changed on the new pre-trip. It used to be at or before 60 PSI. Now it's at or before 55 PSI. I don't know why they changed it, but this is what we're going with now. We're going to 55 PSI. So what we're going to do is we're going to fan the brakes down. By fanning the brakes down, I'm simulating an air leak. I'm pretending that the truck has a massive air leak, and I want to make sure that my emergency warning buzzer goes off at or before 55 PSI. So I'm going to fan the brakes down. Watch it went off at about 62 PSI. So as long as it goes off before 55 PSI, you're good. It went off at about 62, which is fine. The next thing I'm going to check is my parking brakes. I want to fan the brakes down, and they have to pop out somewhere between 20 and 45 PSI. So I'm going to watch the gauges, fan the brakes down. These 2 valves have to pop out. Those would set your emergency brakes if you ran out of air pressure in a rapid manner and you couldn't get on the brakes fast enough. These will activate your emergency brakes for you. So I'm going to fan them down. I'm going to watch the valves, and I'm going to also watch the gauges. Simulating an air leak. There goes the trailer. There goes the tractor. They both happened somewhere around a 35 or so PSI range, which means they're functioning. They're within operational range. That would have set my emergency brakes in the event of rapid air loss. That concludes the in-cab portion of your pre-trip inspection. We're going to go ahead now and step outside the vehicle and do the rest of it. All right, so now we're going to exit the truck again using 3 points of contact at all times while facing the truck. And now's a good time to go ahead and remove the wheel chocks that we put in place earlier, because we're not going to need those anymore. Pull those out, go ahead and stow them. And now we're going to begin the exterior portion of the pre-trip. All right, so now we're going to begin the exterior portion of our pre-trip. Just to clarify some things, we like to use acronyms here that help you remember what you're checking for. So for hard metal parts, okay, we're going to use CDL. That's easy to remember. You're trying to get your CDL. So we use cracked, damaged, or loose to describe the things that could be wrong with hard metal parts. For rubber parts like tires and belts, we use ABC, abrasions, bumps, and cuts. For lenses, lights, and reflectors, it's easy to remember that way. LLRs, lenses, lights, and reflectors, they usually have to be clean, clear, and of the proper color. So that's where we're going to start at now. We're going to check the front of our truck, okay? So the front of the truck, the first thing I'm going to look for is I like to make sure that the front of the truck is not leaning to one side or another, make sure that it has no suspension damage, and I like to look underneath the truck to make sure that I have no fluid leaks. Anything dripping out on the ground would be indicative of that. So now I'm going to check my LLRs, my lenses, lights, and reflectors. I'm going to make sure that they're properly in place, that none of them are missing, and that they're clean, they're clear, and they're of the proper color, okay? Now we're going to move on to the engine compartment, and that's where we're going to check the next part. So in order to do that, we have to go ahead and open the hood. Make sure you let it down gently so it doesn't break the cables. And we're going to move around to the engine compartment, check the things inside we need to look at there. All right, so now that we got the hood open, the first thing I like to do is a general overview. I want to look at everything kind of just like in general. I want to look around. I want to make sure that I don't see anything that's obvious, anything that's obviously cracked, broken, disconnected, bolts undone, any leaks, listen for leaks, look on the ground for any fluids. Does the engine have any fluids dripping down it or things like that? You want to make sure that on basically a general overview, I don't see anything basically. Now we're going to get a little more specific. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check the fluid levels. There's only 3 fluid levels you need to check. You need to check your engine oil, which is checked with your dipstick here. You're going to check your power steering fluid reservoir to check that it's at the proper operating level. And you're going to check your coolant reservoir to make sure it's at the proper operating level. So for your engine oil, you're going to check that with your dipstick. You're going to pull it out. You would wipe it clean, reinsert it, pull it back out, and make sure that the engine oil is between the add line. It's at least above the add line and the max line. Okay, you don't actually have to do that on the exam. Just describe to the examiner what you would be doing. That you would pull the dipstick, wipe it clean, reinsert it, check to make sure that your engine oil level's at the proper operating level. If your power steering and your coolant reservoirs have sight levels, or whether you can see through them, you have to check to make sure that they're between, that they're at least above the add line, between the add and max lines on your power steering fluid reservoir and your coolant reservoir, that your fluids are properly topped off. Okay, so now we're going to check our steering components. I like to check my steering shaft. I'd like to twist it, make sure that I have no more than 5 to 10 degrees of play on it, that it's not completely sloppy. I check my universal joints to make sure that they're not excessively worn or damaged. And I'm going to move down to the power steering gearbox. This is my power steering gearbox. It's not cracked, damaged, or loose. I have no fluids dripping out of it. It's properly bolted to the frame. All the hoses that lead to and from it are properly secured with no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking any fluid. I'm going to move to my 3-piece steering system. Okay, right here, here, and here. I'm going to make sure that they're not cracked, damaged, or loose. They're not bent or broken. They're properly secured, and that they are locked in place with castle nuts and cotter pins. So that way I know they're properly secured to the steering system. All right, so now I'm going to check my steer axle. Okay, my steer axle and my tie rod, which is in the back there, I'm going to check to make sure that they're not bent or broken, that they're free from any illegal welds. I'm going to check my leaf spring. This is a leaf spring system. It's properly secured to the steering axle with U-bolts. I'm going to check to make sure that these U-bolts are properly secured and tight. Looseness would be indicated by shiny metal or metal shavings. The leaf spring front hanger, the leaf spring rear hanger are not cracked, damaged, or loose. They're properly secured. The leaf spring itself is not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's not bent, broken, or missing any of the leaves in it. The bump stop for the leaf spring system is not cracked, damaged, or loose, and it's properly in place. That prevents when you hit a hard bump from the leaf spring system crashing into your frame. My front shock is not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's properly secured to the leaf spring system, and it's not leaking any fluids. So now I'm going to check my air brake lines. Make sure they have no abrasions or bumps or cuts, and all the lines are properly in place. This is for air. This is my ABS wire line, has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and it's all in place. I'm going to then move to the brake systems itself. I'm going to make sure that they're free from contaminants or grease. This is one of those things that's not required on the CDL exam itself, but we teach it here. I want you to check the pad liner as well and make sure that you have at least a 1/4 inch of pad material. Because if the pad gets too thin and you're running out of pad material or you're rubbing metal on metal, it won't matter if it's free from any contaminants or grease. It won't stop the vehicle anyway, so you should be checking that as well. We're going to move our way to the inside of the rim, make sure that it's not showing any that nothing is cracked or damaged on the rim, that it's free from any legal welds. And as we work our way to the outside of the tire, we're going to make sure that our tire is properly seated to the rim all the way around. We're going to check the inside of the tire and make sure that the inside of the tire is smooth. It has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, any bulges sticking out, any damage from hitting a curb or anything like that, and it's properly seated to the rim. We're going to move our way to the top of the tire. I'm going to make sure that the tire has proper tread depth, that because this is a front steer axle, I need at least 4/32 of an inch tread depth. This obviously has plenty of tread on it. That it's free from any defects, nothing is stuck into it. I'm going to move my way to the outside. The outside of the tire, again, just like the inside, can have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, no bulges, no damage to it. One of the things that you want to check on this is some people disagree. We like to make sure that all of our front steers are virgin radials. We don't like to use recaps on a front steer. It's too dangerous. They also have to be matching, not only in size, they have to be the same tire when you're talking about a front steer, okay? Now we move our way to make sure to the sidewall here, make sure that the front tire is properly seated to the rim, make sure that the rim is free from any cracks or any damage, that it's free from any improper welds. Same thing with your lug nuts. We're going to check to make sure that all your lug nuts are present and that they're tight the way you would know they're tight. Any looseness would be indicated by rust streaks, shiny metal around where it seats and it's rubbing the rim and leaving a shiny spot. And then you're going to move your way to the axle seal and make sure that the axle seal is not leaking. If you have a sight window, make sure that it's filled to the proper operating level. You would also want to check to make sure that your valve stem is not leaking any air, that it's not cracked or damaged, and it's accessible. And you would want to check your tire pressure. You want it to be at least 100 psi, and you would have to check that with a gauge. Okay, so now that we're done with the engine compartment, we're going to move down the side of the truck. One of the things that I want to clarify is that when you do your pre-trip with the state, you're only required to check one axle. But the problem with that is, from an educational perspective, for me as a trainer and a school owner, is that on this front axle, this is a leaf spring axle. Well, it doesn't teach you how to check an airbag axle because it uses different components, okay? So for the purposes of the actual test, you only have to check one axle. When we get to the back of the truck there, I'm going to show you how to check the rest of it so that you know exactly how to check an air ride suspension axle because it uses different components. So we're going to move down the side of the truck. This is an opportunity to do a general overview, make sure that I have nothing cracked, damaged, or loose that I can see obviously. Make sure that any lenses, lights, and reflectors on this side of the truck are clean, clear, and of the proper color. I'm also going to check that my mirror is properly secured to the truck. Again, make sure that it's not cracked, damaged, or loose. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and check my battery box. This is one of the things that they've changed on the new pre-trip. You're required to check the battery box. You're going to make sure that it's properly secured and mounted to the truck. You're going to open it up. You're going to look inside. Now you got to keep in mind, on some trucks you're not going to be able to get to the battery box. It could be secured behind paneling that you can't get to. You got to do the best you can. If you can't do it, that's fine. On this truck, we're lucky we can. I'm going to go ahead and lift the lid up. I'm going to look inside. You don't have a lot of room to look inside. You're going to make sure that the batteries are properly mounted and secured. You're going to make sure that the battery wires are properly secured and they have no sign of obvious corrosion. You're going to go ahead and lock it all back in place, secure it back down. At this point, you're also going to check, on this truck at least, you're going to check your DEF cap here. You are required to check DEF since all new modern trucks have to use DEF for emissions control. You're going to check to make sure it's properly secured and that the DEF tank is secured and it's not leaking any fluids out. You're going to go ahead and put it back in place. And then we're going to move down to the side of the truck here, and we're going to check our fuel tank. I'm going to make sure that the fuel tank is properly secured. All the straps are in place. They're not rusted. They're not cracked or damaged or broken. All the bolts are properly in place. The fuel tank itself is not cracked or damaged. It's not leaking any fluids out of it. Then I'm going to go ahead and check the cap. I'm going to remove the cap. I'm going to check to make sure that the safety seal or safety chain is on and that the seal around the inside of the cap is properly secured and in place, has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, so it doesn't allow any leaks for the fuel to come out. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and check the frame. I'm going to check both frame rails, make sure that they have it has no illegal welds, make sure it's not cracked, bent, damaged in any way. It's an opportunity to check both sides of the frame. We can do that from here, and as you're looking underneath the truck, you inspect it all the way back as well. And then we're going to move on back here to the landing gear. I'm going to make sure that my landing gear is properly secured. I'm going to make sure that both the lateral bracing and the landing gear itself is not cracked, damaged, or loose, that the landing gear handle, that everything goes up and down properly. You check it for mechanical function, and then when you're done, you want to make sure that your landing gear handle is properly stowed. From here, we'll also want to use this time to make sure that I have proper clearance between the rear of the truck and the landing gear, so that while I'm turning and making turns in the truck, I don't get the landing gear crashing against my back tires or the frame of the truck. All right, so we're going to begin our coupling. The first thing we're going to check is our cables that connect the truck to the trailer. We've got 3 cables on every truck. It's always the same. You've got a pigtail, which is your electrical cable. You're going to want to flip the lock up, pull the cable out, check it to make sure that it's free from any obstructions inside the holes, that we have no bent or missing pins. As you pull it out, make sure you pull it out by the actual unit, not by the cable, because you could actually separate some of those electrical wires. And then our glad hands, you're going to remove your glad hands and you're going to check them, make sure that the rubbers have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and it's free from any blockage or debris, and that the glad hands are properly secured. You're going to do both your emergency line and your signal line. Now, for the purposes of the test, you're not going to actually be required to take it off. You just have to describe what you would do. That I would remove these and I would check it for this. I would pull my electrical line and I would check it for that. Just explain to the examiner. So now we're going to check the coupling of the truck. We're going to be checking the items that couple the truck and the trailer together to make sure that it's properly secured. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go underneath and we're going to check the apron. This is the apron. We're going to make sure that it's not cracked or damaged. We're then going to follow it over to the 5th wheel assembly, which is right there. We're going to check to make sure that there is no gap, there is no daylight between the 5th wheel skid plate and the apron. You can't see any light between it. That would indicate that it may be improperly coupled. It may be what's called high hooked. And then when you pull away, it could actually drop the trailer off the truck. You're going to check the skid plate itself to make sure it's not cracked, damaged, or loose. You're going to check the stow handle to make sure that it's in the locked position. You're going to check the platform pin. This has an inspection plate over it, so you can't see it, but it's properly bolted in place. You're going to check the platform itself to make sure it's not cracked, damaged, or loose. It has no broken welds. This is a sliding 5th wheel assembly. You're going to identify that. You're going to check to make sure that the mounting bolts, both upper and lower, are properly secured. They're not loose. None of them are missing. You're also going to make sure that the 5th wheel locking pins are in the locked position and they're properly in place. You can see them locked in there. That prevents the 5th wheel from sliding back and forth and letting your whole trailer slide back and forth if you didn't have it properly secured. At this point, we're going to go underneath the trailer. We're going to look inside and check the kingpin and the locking jaws. Okay, so now we're under the truck. We're going to look up into the 5th wheel assembly, and we're going to make sure that the kingpin is properly greased. It's not cracked, damaged, bent, or broken. And you're going to make sure that the shackle is properly locked around the kingpin. You can see it moving horizontally where it's locked across the kingpin there. We're going to then move to the back of the truck while we're under here, and we're going to check our lights, lenses, and reflectors, make sure that they're clean, clear, and of the proper color. And now would be a good time while you're on the side of the trailer to check that the trailer has all of its DOT reflective tape in place and that it's clean and clear and that you can see it and it's not covered with grease, mud, or dirt. Okay, so if you remember, I said that there's going to be certain parts of the truck that you won't be inspecting for the CDL exam, but for purposes of attending a school and knowing how trucks work, you need to know different suspension parts. Because we checked the front suspension, but that's a leaf spring suspension. That's not what we have on the back of most trucks today, or air ride suspension trucks. So to say that you know how to check all the axles just because you checked a leaf spring system is not accurate. So again, I'm allowed to train to a higher standard. I want to make sure that you understand all the working components of a suspension system, because in the real world, you're going to have to be really checking it. Like I said, there's a difference between the exam and the actual real world. And what's different about this is an air ride suspension. Air ride suspensions do not use leaf springs. Many times, different parts on here that may look like a leaf spring, like this control arm here, is described as a leaf spring because it looks kind of like one, but it is not a leaf spring. It's what's called a control arm. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the frame bracket itself. This is the bracket that bolts to the control arm. The frame bracket is not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's properly bolted to the frame itself, and it's showing no signs of illegal welds. Then you're going to check the eye bolt. The eye bolt right here goes through the control arm. Okay, and you're going to make sure it's properly secured, it's not cracked, damaged, or loose, and then bolt is properly in place. The control arm itself is not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's free from any illegal welds. And the rear axle is properly secured to the control arm with U-bolts. These U-bolts are properly secured and tightened. Any looseness would be indicated by shiny metal shaving. The shock tower, both upper and lower mounts are properly secured. They're not cracked, damaged, or loose, and the shock itself is not leaking any fluids. And then the last thing you're going to want to check on this axle system is the airbag itself, because this is an air ride suspension. This uses an airbag. You're going to check the upper mounting plate, the lower mounting plate for the airbag. It's not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's properly secured to the frame. And you also want to make sure it's free from excessive rust, because road salts and everything over the wintertime will eat through the top of that and cause a leak in the airbag system. You have to understand something that's really important about these trucks. Anything that operates on this truck off of air pressure, like the airbag systems on your cab, the air ride seat in the truck that you sit on, they are all operated off air pressure. Where do you think it gets that air pressure from? It gets it from your brake system. So a leak in an airbag is not just a leak, it's critical, because it's a leak in your air brake system as well. So those leaks have to be addressed, making sure that that top plate is not rusted and corroded from road salts where it'll eat through it, and that will cause an air leak many times. The bag itself is free from any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. It's in good condition, it's not dry rotted, and it's not leaking, and it's properly secured to the control arm. So again, many times people will confuse an air ride system and a leaf spring system, and they'll name them different parts. It really doesn't matter what the name is. What matters is that you know what parts you're checking and what you're checking it for. That's what's most important. So that concludes the pre-trip inspection, as is going to be required by your state examiner. Okay, that's the test model that's been put forth by AMVA and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. With that being said, because it leaves so much out, there's so many things that we don't check on the actual test, you are going to have to check in real life, okay? So we're leaving the whole trailer out, we're leaving the whole trailer's rear suspension out and everything. On a real pre-trip, you're gonna have to do both sides of the truck. You're gonna have to do from bumper to bumper, and as you do your walk around and make sure that everything is functioning properly. The idea of the test, what it does is they recognized on the old test model many of the same things you had to demonstrate over and over and over again. So you would have to check a front steer tire if you got a whole truck. You'd have to check a front steer tire. You'd have to check a rear drive tire. You'd have to check a rear trailer tire, a rim, lug nuts. Those are all the same. Brake chambers are a brake chamber. All that is the same. So the idea is, if you know how to demonstrate that you can check it on one axle, you ostensibly should know how to check it on another axle. Just keep in mind, the test is not the real world. In the real world, you got to do the whole truck. I've had many people watch our previous video, which is about an hour and 14 minutes long, something like that, and they couldn't understand why they were expected to do a 1 hour long pre-trip every day. You're not. It doesn't take you a full hour to do a real pre-trip. It takes me an hour to show you how to do it and talk to you about it and demonstrate certain things and show certain things. In real life, a real pre-trip takes you about 15 minutes on a simple walk around to make sure that everything's functional. But this is what you'll need to do to get through the test. Keep in mind, again, I want to be clear, this is only if your state has transferred over to the new CDL model, okay? We won't be releasing this video. Right now we're shooting it in November. We won't be releasing it till mid-January when our state transfers over to the new CDL model. Some states have already done it and are operating on it today in November. Some states might not do it till sometime mid-next year, and who knows, some states may go longer than that. Not every state plays ball with FMCSA the way they should. So you'll have to check with your state to find out which model you should be using. If it's a new one, you can use this pre-trip. But we appreciate you guys joining us. If you got any questions, give us a call here at Apex CDL Institute, 913-585-1120. You can check us out on Facebook. You can check us out on the web at www.apexcdl.com. And this is for anybody who needs to use it. This isn't just for my students. So if anybody needs to use this around the country, if you're another school, if you're a state organization and you need help with training, you can use any video that we have hosted on YouTube. The only thing we ask is that you actually watch it on our YouTube channel, so at least we get some credit for it. We put a lot of time into material, into figuring this stuff out and learning the best way to teach it. But as always, be safe out there, and thanks for joining us.